All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us for the Meet My Network podcast. My name is Michael Doran from Talent Grind, and today I am joined by my new friend, Marc Lipkin. Mark is the director of talent acquisition and executive search for Material Bank. He was previously an executive recruiter at Amazon. He was also director of technical talent acquisition at Gap and even works at Twitch in the past. So, Mark, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing?
Thanks, Michael. Thanks so much for having me here. Really
Yeah,
appreciate it. It's great to connect with you.
Yeah, it's great to connect with you as well. So why don't we just jump and dive right into it? What initially drew you to recruiting as a career?
Yeah, it's funny. It was all about timing. Well, my I grew up in a house where my mom was actually like a top biller at Robert Half,
Oh, really?
and yes, so my dad was also in outside sales. So
Mm,
the dinner time conversations were all about building relationships, and they were both very competitive. How they were both making it happen in their careers, but I never thought that I would actually do this. I ended up going to Berkeley when I graduated. Well, there was this sort of serendipity. It was the late .com days. And I can remember seeing, I don't know if you guys remember this, but companies would have lists of job openings, like
yeah.
for all these different types of engineers. And I was like, just blown away. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. There's no way they're going to fill all these positions.
Yeah.
And so scrappy boutique agencies were hiring at the time when I graduated. Instead of pursuing law school or anything, I started working for an agency that was specific to just software engineers. And this was like 97, 98.
Mm,
And this was before really in-house recruiters became a thing. And so it was typically like your HR person at a startup company, and they were the gatekeepers and you had to get around them. And we were just basically trying to get job orders and then flipping it around and trying to get candidates and just being extremely scrappy because everything was like, how are you going to find people? I mean, I
Did,
think we had Monster or something like that. I
did
mean, but
headhunter.com?
yeah,
Yeah. Though that was the first time I ever saw a database of resumes on the internet that I could
right.
download, and it was like manna from heaven to me.
Yeah, it's like a huge step in technology to be able to do that for you. Otherwise, we had one of my so the company was Heuristic Search, and myself and I first started opening up an office in Boston from the Silicon Valley. And the way I did that was there was a book. It was like a white book, a catalog of all the different companies in the area. And so Concord Communications, Lycos, and those guys, and then all the MIT sort of like spin-off startups. And it was really interesting. But I was doing that from San Jose. And I get to the office at 5 in the morning and I just start cranking away and start making it happen. And that was really exhilarating. Just, those companies are just huge now in a lot of cases, or maybe they're not, but it was just kind of talking to founders and VP of engineering about their open positions at that time was really fun.
So how did you ultimately transition from being an individual contributor into a management role?
It was more of a gradual transition when I got asked to like lead teams. A lot of time I was always asked, well, what do you want to do? Because I was always like the top producer. And that was the thing I was a little bit weary about as leading teams is, well, I really found my success early on when I was at Corn Ferry as an individual contributor.
Mm,
And I could see myself like just kind of continually doing that. But what had happened was you start getting pulled in to interview people for the company, like other recruiters. And then before you know it, they're asking you to lead a small project, but they won't like actually report to you. Like you won't actually
right.
manage them. So for example, like when I was at Lab 126 with Amazon, I was one of the first technical recruiters there on a very confidential project, which became the Astro robot. Yeah. And I was just an individual contributor, but I was responsible for the software piece. And so I had to basically develop a whole recruiting strategy and all this stuff, and then interview people. And then all of a sudden I had a team of 10 sourcers, but they weren't actually reporting to me. I was just the
Right.
lead and I was hands on. I
Sure.
was the recruiter and they were trying to identify talent. So that's it. a great way to scale if you have to hire like 500 people, right? So that it kind of just started from there where I was like, um, making a lot of hires and doing a really good job as an individual contributor. And then folks just wanted me to start mentoring and start. Then when I got into actually managing people's, because that lead position just morphed into, oh, can you take on more? Can you take on more? And can you also never have dropped the individual contributor type? Like I've always been responsible for filling roles, even as a director. So
That's a good idea, right? You want to keep
yeah,
your skill sharp.
absolutely. And that's the part that I really enjoy. So I don't ever want to really get away from that.
But was there a particular skill or insight that you kind of wish that you had maybe developed earlier in your career?
That's a really good question. I would say just, well, you're going to work with a lot of different personalities, and just to heads down, be adaptable, flexible. These are all the things that I've learned because you're going to have a lot of different personalities, a lot of different styles. And if you have just a fixed way of doing things, it's not really overall beneficial. So you have to be really flexible
Yeah.
and be able to work with leaders from a variety of different styles. And then on the flip side, of course, evaluating candidates, you have to really take the time to listen because there's so many different personalities. There's just not one type that is like exceptional. Oh, they sound exceptional. So make them put it. It's no, they come in so many different shapes and sizes. And really, people can be found in a lot of different areas. And it's not just one profile. So,
Got it. You've worked in a lot of different industries and sectors. You've worked for like Walmart, you've worked at Google in the past, you've worked for agencies, Twitch, Gap, which is retail, and obviously Amazon, and now you work for Material Bank. Was there one industry or function that you really enjoyed the most?
my experience at Google was pretty amazing. I think that was working with their business operations and strategy team. It's basically a group at the time of about 60 people, and they're grooming the future leaders of the company. And
Mm,
this was at a time where to get an interview, the ratio to get an offer was 1 out of 1,000. And so the bar was just so incredibly high, and everybody there was not just smart, but had a really strong EQ as well. These are
mm.
potential leaders. So that was internet space. These are like essentially people who went to Bain, BCG, McKinsey. They were like top tier rankings all the way through. They had to go through a very rigorous interview process. And so I think I got to really experience what that was all about and what makes people, at least in our like tech space, exceptional, right?
Yeah.
What is the best of the best? I got to really understand what that really looked like and why.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I did a lot of recruiting at Google, kind of across it was at the at work organization. Now I think it's just Google Cloud now. Sales into executive recruiting for them. And I did executive recruiting at Dropbox, working with Dennis Woodside, who
Yeah.
now is like president of, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think just being exposed to those people and the way that they operate and the way that they work is extremely valuable. And that's, I think, what everybody should maybe aspire to is to be able to really work with a world-class team, obviously developing your skill,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely. That's what I mean.
Because you're
At least
like,
how I aspire.
you like me, gradually worked your way up into it. You try to be strategic with each move you made and kind of get where you wanted to go, it appears.
It's maybe there's a little bit of that and a little bit might be just luck and
Luck,
destiny.
yeah,
Who
yeah,
knows? But
yeah.
it's like how I found my current role. It's just like in my journey through working with Amazon and everything, the people that I met, and that's just how things came out of that. Um, I'm currently at Material Bank, which is like a 300-person startup company. Our CEO is Sebastian Gunningham, who was the SVP at Amazon for 12 years,
Oh,
and he
wow.
reported to Bezos. And so my team when I was last at Amazon, they had gone through a restructuring, and I was basically working, which I thought was the best job I've ever had. And that's the big restructuring and everything. The next position I found was basically reporting up to Sebastian. So I think everything worked out for the best. But my position at Amazon was pretty fun. It was basically working with, I don't know if this, but Amazon has this academic program where they hire the very best, brightest academics from around the world to work on cutting edge projects and technology. And I was working, they called very senior professors scholars. So as
Right.
part of this scholar recruiting, they flew me to Croatia and Vancouver, and I was attending NLP conferences before ChatGPT came out.
Wow.
And so it was a really interesting time. My job was essentially to represent Amazon and network with all the world's foremost academics, not only in this space,
Incredible.
but also robotics, and make friends with them and introduce the program. So it was really amazing, something I really enjoyed. So you just never know. And now I'm in a great place too, help build this company. So you just
Yeah.
never know what's going to be around the corner.
What's kind of the most challenging type of position looking back that you've had to fill, just out of curiosity?
I get asked that sometimes, like in interviews. I think the one position I always think back on was hiring the head of information security at Walmart when I was at Corn Ferry. And that was a really difficult role because the size and scope of Walmart at the time, it's still huge, right? Like largest retailer, but their scope of operations and had to really put a lot of thought into this. Where would they potentially come from? So basically, I think the person came out of the FBI or Department of something in the federal government where they could, it was the only thing that was similar in size and scope to a role at Walmart. And yeah, like, all the security that they were working on at the time was only most relevant to someone out of that NSA type of background.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
Yeah.
How are you networking with people out of the government like that? It's not like they're necessarily on LinkedIn. Were you going?
Well, one guy in particular, I remember tracking down, I'd gotten his information from a conference. I found out that he was part of a country club. I got his number from the country club and just got in touch with him directly. So it's like you just had to get so super
That's
creative. I mean,
scrappy.
that was like, yeah, I mean, it's just you build your list, you follow the leads, you ask for referrals before you're going down different rabbit holes. And hopefully if you're persistent enough and can think creatively enough, it'll happen.
Yeah, that's really interesting point, and that's valuable perspective, I think, for someone who's maybe started recruiting in the last 10 years where all they've known is LinkedIn, is that sometimes the best talent is kind of out of the box like that. And it's really about the kind of the relationships that you build to get the knowledge and the information that you need in order to ultimately track down the person that you need for that role, right?
Yeah. I mean, this was the world that we lived in before.
Yeah.
Honestly, and that's how a lot of us who have more than 25 years of experience kind of like looked at it. You didn't have the luxury nowadays. I mean, you don't really need to have that much experience you're building search, Boolean search strings. You throw it into LinkedIn or GitHub or wherever it might be. Um, and do you really need to utilize that resourcefulness and that scrappiness? Yes, but
You can
without
do it different
LinkedIn,
ways.
it's much, much harder.
Well, you can use AI to even brainstorm ideas. You can use AI to pull together
Build
lists.
your
You know, like I
list.
was
Absolutely. Yeah.
we've got a client who's specifically within aviation, and so they've got really specific searches. And I was working with my team and just working with Claude, I was able to put together a list of 237 different companies that they could
Mhm.
target out of general aviation, commercial aviation, and military aviation, because I'm also a pilot. So I know a lot about that subject matter area, but working with AI allowed me to
Yeah.
essentially do that in like maybe a 45-minute meeting. And now they've got months worth of searching work that they can do
Yeah.
out of that. So I think
Oh,
it's
that's
kind of
great.
mixing the old and the new, right?
Yeah, that's
And
important.
thinking thinking outside of the box. So you've been managing teams for a while. Have you seen a change in the structure of recruiting teams, or are you doing something different in material bank now than maybe you had done
Well,
previously?
my team now is very small. It's
Yeah.
just basically we're all roll up our sleeves, get it done. There's only three of us
Mm.
for a team of 300. I have it divided between technical and non-technical, and they're all full life cycle. and
Okay.
they can all do more than recruiting as well. I was able to get them both promoted actually this year, which is awesome. I'm I believe in, I don't know if you know the term like servant leadership.
Yeah.
So that's something that really inspires me. And I wanted to be the type of manager that I didn't have really.
Yeah.
And so I'm all about removing blockers. How can I support you in your development, your career? And then also that some people just don't know the gifts that they have. Like I love, and this is maybe even the recruiting aspect, is trying to identify what are their strengths and how can I play up their strengths, how and make them feel really confident about their experience, like what they do.
Yeah.
So that's part of a lot of times with junior folks, they're trying to prove themselves. They don't know, and so they do need feedback. And they need to hear like what they're good at and what areas they are opportunities for them to strengthen. But I'm all about just like focusing on the positive, make that what you really do well.
That absolutely makes sense. Let's switch gears to technology a little bit. What technologies or approaches kind of are you most excited about in recruiting?
I mean, we're using AI and AI tools, and my company's very forward in terms of thinking about AI agents and how we can best utilize that all the way across the company.
Mm.
We did come up with a little couple POCs for how we can use AI in recruiting, but it's something in the area that we're like amazed by that on a weekly basis, things are changing. So we all been leveraging ChatGPT and stuff. Now the downside is that you really have, as it is right now, it's not really good enough to, if you say throw in a job description, rank these candidates, you really need to take a look at it. So the human element is very important here.
Trust.
Yeah, it just don't blind trust that it knows everything. It doesn't. It's just a machine. And there's a lot of things that it's not quite there yet. So
Yeah. Cool.
your jobs are still like, in my perspective, your jobs are still safe as long as you can add a lot of value to how you look at people.
Yeah, but it sounds like you were aligning more to the model that I'm starting to see is companies having smaller recruiting teams, but then maybe having more long-term permanent teams and maybe getting away from this
Yeah.
hiring and firing, and then perhaps augmenting like with external services like mine on a monthly basis or something like that during heavy busy periods and
Mhm.
just really kind of keeping it lean. Is that kind of what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, I definitely think that's a trend. And that's a trend across organizations in general to move away from these massive, heavily stacked teams to basically from engineering all the way through. As a company, we're reading a book called Exponential Organizations. It was basically all about that.
Hmm.
How do you become more efficient, do more with less? So that's going to be the trend as we, automate more and more things, but it just puts us more in a strategic driver's seat, I think. And so what we've seen is technology really helping out in a lot of different areas like this.
When you're hiring, well, what type of qualities do you normally look for when you're hiring recruiters?
I love people who are articulate and persistent, who are real, team players. The team that I have now, we could call each other at whatever time, and it's not about them really. It's about like us. So making each other, but I have to set the tone. So I have to let them know that I'm here to help them succeed, basically. Make that other traits for recruiters. I mean, you should be outstanding closer too. The whole gamut is being able to identify the best people, communicate well, work really well with hiring managers, be strategic in your mindset of that's always in the last, that's been sort of the rallying cry, right? Is show them that you're a talent advisor, not just an order taker. And that's certainly always the case. People who set a really high bar there are always thinking around the corner and they're also taking action on that, right? They'll look at executive goals and be able to craft their own recruiting strategy around that. And then even proactively talk to people and show people that executives didn't even know that they needed.
Before they know what the need
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
bringing your expertise in and knowing what you need to scale, where it's gonna break, what you need
Right.
to do to make sure it doesn't break, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. So that's what I look at.
So what skills do you think are going to be the most important for recruiters in the next 3 to 5 years?
A lot of those type of same skills. I think we're looking for more really well-rounded people that also understand the business. I think recruiters have to show the value to the business, not just by hiring. I think we're kind of going beyond that for sure, right? So
And what areas do they need to show value?
willingness to branch out and to take on projects other than um, that kind of prove their value beyond just filling roles. So, for example, if you're a contract recruiter and you have to fill 50 positions, it's not just about those positions, right? It's also about employer branding, and it's also about interview process and an employee or candidate experience that makes sense. And so adding your value in different areas like that, it's just so important versus you just filled a role, you did your job. And companies looking for more than
Got it. Are there any specific recruiting tasks that you think AI can't replace?
yeah, interviewing.
Okay.
I mean, having done this for so long, I can tell when I talk to candidates where they're at,
Hmm.
what, like, really where they're at, like in their career, their excitement about this role, how they're feeling about, and that comes from like intuition and how I would compare them to other people. Now, an AI tool can be great in a lot of areas, but this human understanding piece, I'm not sure when that will happen.
Yeah. Do you have any overall concerns about AI in recruiting?
Yeah, I want us to realize that they're basically agents or tools for us.
Yeah.
There is this perception right now where it's like people are very worried that AI is going to take their jobs. And I think there is a lot of trepidation about that. But I think we, a- w- we have a tremendous amount of value to add just by our human piece of being trusting our intuition and our voice in this process. We can't forget that we actually have a lot of value in the entire process of building a company of humans.
Yeah, that's interesting. I definitely agree with you on that. I've been positing that I feel in the future more CEOs should come out of recruiting. Like traditionally, CEOs come out of finance and they come out of sales. And out in the valley, they come out of engineering. But
Mhm.
who better to make a CEO than someone who's been inside working with the managers, knows every position in a company, is actually building the company from the inside, and
Yeah.
kind of raised in an HR environment where you need to be compliant with laws. You need to be compliant with structure. You can't. We've seen so many like from Enron on to so many downfalls from companies run from people and other elements, right? Like even like where we live right now, where companies like Meta are hiring a bunch of people, firing a bunch of people, hiring a bunch of people, firing a bunch of people, and without even a thought about the negative weight in people's lives that they're
Mhm.
leaving behind them, right? The one of the this main things that I saw when I came out to Silicon Valley, but I thought it'd be great working for engineers until I realized that they kind of look at human beings, not all of them, but some look at human beings almost like servers in a data center, right? You work it
Yeah.
hard and you burn it out, you just pop it out, put something new in.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the environment I feel like we've been working in the last maybe 10 or 15 years. And I do hope that now in this new AI era, we can see more companies like yours who are just working with smaller team, augmenting them if needed, and really focused on kind of developing people outside of even recruiting. Because you never
Yeah.
know what skills somebody, they might be good at product management. They might be good in
Right.
another area.
There's something about exceptional leaders that other people want to work for them.
Yeah.
And you can tell they're the type of people that, in my eyes, they take the time to get to know other people. And a lot of Silicon Valley startup stereotypes aren't like that at all, right? They're smart, they're future looking in terms of technology, and they know everything technically. But when it really comes down to developing people, they've got a long way to go.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. And so whatever space those guys come out of, or girls, because I think there's a tremendous number of women that need to be in leadership positions that are probably just as well qualified or probably even better than a lot of men or whatever have you.
Yeah.
It's about leadership and that human element that I think we can really help with Sure. A recruiter can be a CEO. Absolutely. Um, and just like any other position, right?
Yeah. I hope to see more of that in the future. So if you could change one thing about the recruiting industry, what would it be?
Sometimes I feel like the industry hasn't really received enough respect.
I agree.
I would love to see more leaders spend more time with recruiters, with their recruiters. So if you're CEO of Google or whoever it might be, spend time with your talent leaders and spend time with the recruiters and talk to them about what their day is like and what candidates say about your company that you're trying to hire. You need to hire great people, right? And what do those conversations look like? What are people's concerns? And how can we all work together? And how can the entire leadership sing the same song? And that's important, right? And how can they all like row in the same direction? What can they do to help? I mean, and you hear that, it is a bit cliche, but they say that people are their most important asset. I've heard from every organization says this, right? How many leaders actually spend the time with their people? So I would love to see that. It seems like for some reason, they kind of recruiting lacks a little bit of respect from leadership across the board.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I really don't understand it because it's this weird dichotomy out here where like founders will say, well, recruiting is the most important job. But then, like, I built a talent framework, right? It was combined what I saw at Google with this crazy framework I saw at Dropbox, and I modified it for startups, and it's really great. I've got it in place at one startup, and they're actually gaining a reputation in their industry for being really good at recruiting. The CEO was also an early Amazonian. He was like one of the first 300. So when
Yeah.
you put him together with me, like it's kind of an explosion of awesome recruiting process.
Well,
And the cool
yeah.
thing about him was like he brought me in when he had 3 people because he understood how important recruiting is. And we've been working and iterating on this process for 5 years, right?
Mhm.
And it's now becoming a force multiplier for his business.
Mm.
And I've tried to give I give this framework away for free now, and actually it's gonna be part of our knowledge base for Talent Grind. People will be able to download their own copy of it. I initially tried to sell it, nobody wanted to buy it. Then I tried to give it away, a few people took it, and I would talk to SaaS CEOs, and I would say, "Well, listen, you wouldn't build a product without identifying what technology frameworks, right? What's your back end tech? What's your front end? What type of infrastructure you're working on? You wouldn't build a product without making those decisions. Why would you build a business without putting a framework around how you're evaluating talent, how you're hiring talent, and then how you're performance managing and developing the careers of the talent that you bring in, right? Like the company that does all of that, in my opinion, I think is going to be at an advantage in the future over other companies who are just, it's the final interview process and the executive comes in and tell me about your background and experience.
Yeah. I mean, a broken hiring process says volumes about the company itself.
Sure.
I can remember when I was early in my recruiting days, worked for a small routine search firm. And when I got there, there was a CTO search. I'll never forget. They were going on 30 and 35 candidates. And
Oof.
I'm like, what, huh? What? How
Yeah.
does this happen? No way. Isn't someone here going to say timeout? And I think we really need to look at what's going on. So that's just an example of what does this say about the company? And I think I can remember at the time they had 15 people interviewing candidates
Oh
like
yeah.
on channel. So there's a problem. But you're partnering with someone from Amazon who was there in the early days is spot on. Amazon is one company that really has their act together in terms of interviewing. I
Mm.
mean, it is a very clear process. And I learned a lot from how they get the good and the bad, but I take a lot of best practices from what I do now to what I learned from Amazon.
Yeah, I completely agree. In fact, I do product management the Amazon way. I've got a couple templates. I'm giving those away to people for free that I've just used internally in my business in order to just get us, if we want to put a new feature into our product, if we want to do a big initiative, put it down on paper first, really think about it, really figure it out. In fact, even the process we developed at Minnow, what we've ultimately come to is like a really comprehensive intake form that the hiring manager is responsible for filling out. And it goes all the way down to the level of what interview questions that like, what competencies do you want us to evaluate to for this role? And then what interview questions do you want for each stage of the interview process, or for us just to include in it? And
Yeah.
then the recruiter then has all the information that they need to be able to go out and start to get working, executing, and the hiring manager is essentially out of it until they start feeding candidates to them, right? And that's what I advise people to iterate towards. Because the more that you can do that, one thing I saw, like when I was at Dropbox, they were getting ready to go public, and the reason they built a talent framework is because they still had hiring managers trying to figure out with the recruiter what level set. I'm sure you've seen that before, like what level they need, what responsibilities they need. All of a sudden, the rec goes out to 60, 90 days because they're jumping all over in terms of experience. And the hiring manager's trying to figure it out from all the interviews, which just is a
Yeah.
horribly inefficient process.
Yeah. Now, in terms of making processes more efficient and smarter, it's really helpful to engage some sort of like change management best practices.
Mm.
It's very difficult to influence organizations if you just jump in and say, this is the new way of doing it.
Can you talk
Okay.
about that? I'd love to hear your perspective on like
Well,
exactly what type of change management process do you need to fix or improve a kind of an entrenched recruiting system, but that is still fundamentally broken?
yeah. I mean, you have to recognize that there's a lot of people that are very used to one way of doing things, and you're going to come in with a new way of doing things, and there's going to be some detractors and everything. A lot of it has to do with getting the right stakeholders together, crafting a plan, and then the communication that happens as you're doing it, like announcing it, maybe through different communication channels. I wouldn't say that I'm an expert by any means in change management, although I work with other people that have experience in this and they can help you bring the new way of looking at things to the organization. And that's really important in order to like make those partnerships and leverage them for the initiatives that you want to see happen.
And that's actually a good prompt tip, right? If you don't have access to a change management organization, perhaps have AI create a prompt for you to develop a
Yeah.
change management expert who can advise you on how to do this type of product or project,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. That's, yeah. I mean, the whole communication thing. And so if you don't do that properly, you could have the best ideas in the world, but they may not be accepted because the people are going to be like, no, I don't think so. But, or they might say, oh, I never saw that email because it wasn't properly communicated in a way where it's not just an email, but it's like maybe a Slack message, maybe it's an email, maybe it's a calendar invite, maybe it's a talk, maybe, and then for something that's going to happen in 6 weeks. So
Yeah.
it's managing that whole understanding that you're trying to get adoption.
I think just one more question. It's really nice to talk to another old pro. I've also got over 25 years of experience recruiting. I remember, like I was just talking on this live stream before you and I talked. Like I lived through the original internet bubble bursting. Like I worked for the
Yeah.
hottest internet company in Chicago at the time. They were called Divine Interventures. Like I thought I was going to be rich.
Oh, I remember them.
You remember Divine? Yeah,
Yes.
I did all their technical recruiting at Divine, and I got in super, super early, and it was a crazy time because I was early in my career. I'd go to network events in Chicago, I'd have a line of people waiting to talk to me.
Yeah.
It was a really exciting time, and then they went public right as the internet bubble burst.
Yeah.
Everything that we thought was gonna be huge just blew up, and it kinda went away.
That's so interesting. I
You
remember a small startup. I think I made my first VP hire with a small startup called Ethnic Grocer.
I
I think
remember
they were,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that reminded me of your experience there. So
Yeah. So what keeps you passionate about recruiting?
it's just understanding people. Like ultimately a people profession. I love spending time and reading them, but I also like the competitive side. And I love the business side. Building a business and maybe making something exceptional. I'll give you a story. When I was at that firm where I hired my first VP hire, I had a sourcing team. There was a retained search firm, and one of the guys just was not happy. And he's really smart, wanted to do like maybe engineering or something, and he can pick it up. And he was background in music, right? So he's really smart. They wouldn't really give him the opportunity at this company to do that. So when I left and I took a contract at a company, I hired him as a junior sysadmin, and he quickly learned all this stuff and became a Java developer, and then a really good guy, kind of the go-to for a lot of stuff. Became a VP of engineering. Now he's CEO of a software company, and we're still friends and everything. And it's just so cool to see his journey. And no one really believed in him in the early days, and he really had to continue kind of pursuing it and pursuing it. So it's great to see stories like that.
Yeah, I definitely think the long-term effects of the work that you do. I had someone who worked for me as my sourcer for a couple years. When he started working with me, he was living in like literally a house with 6 other people in Buenos Aires. By the time Deal stole him from me, he was living in his own apartment in Puerto Madero, which is like the Gold Coast of Buenos Aires. And he's now a recruiter at Deal. He's been there for 3 years, and I think he's got a really good life. And I was able to, we were working with Discord and companies like that. Like I was allowing him to be in the room listening, right? And to be able to soak up that knowledge, because for me, that's almost as valuable as the money that you make working for someone, just being exposed and being in the
Yeah.
room and seeing how people work and
Yeah.
operate. Kind of to your point earlier when you started working with Amazon and you were just in that room and you were working with world-class people and like people from McKinsey and stuff like that. That just,
Oh, yeah.
I would say to everybody that you should look for those opportunities and push yourself. Like
Yeah.
I networked into Google by cold LinkedIn messaging Laszlo Bach after I read
Oh,
the New
okay.
York Times article. And then he
Oh,
instructed this company to contact me. And I got soft rejected 3 times over 4 months, but because I came
hmm
from Laszlo, they were afraid to hard reject me. So I
hmm
kept asking what other hoop do I need to jump through to get there. And then eventually I got, a VC interview, and then I got the job, and that opportunity brought me out to the Bay Area and changed my life.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's a pretty cool story. Yeah, that was definitely the place to be where a lot of things were happening, and it was really fun. And another thing about those sort of early .com days is, as a recruiter, basically, and headhunter, you were seeing people that were becoming multimillionaires like
Yeah.
instantly based on where you placed them.
Yeah.
And just to kind of have that excitement and that buzz, there was a lot of cool stuff happening.
Awesome. Well, cool. Well, listen, Mark, this has been a really great conversation. I think we've covered a lot. I want to thank you so much for coming on the Meet My Network podcast. It was really great meeting you and hearing about your background experience. And I hope that this is beneficial for other people. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Michael.
Yep.